Hilchos Brachos, Perek Shlishi, the Laws of Blessings, Chapter 3. Today we're going to start to define what's considered bread for Birkat HaMazon. Besides for bread, there's 5 other blessings that we make on food. Right? Hagafen we make on wine, ha'etz we make on fruit, mizonot we make on the baked goods, ha'adama, things that grow from the ground, and shehakol is things that are everything else. So we're going to be discussing some of those blessings also as they come up in relationship to bread. But the main topic is going to be discussing what's considered bread to obligate you in making hamotzi before and Birkat HaMazon afterwards. Says the Rambam, Chamisha minin hein halacha aleph, there are 5 types of grain. Hachitin, that's wheat. V'haseorin is barley. V'hakusmin is spelt. V'shibolet shual is oats. V'shifon is rye. Hakusmin mimin hachitin. V'shibolet shual v'shifon mimin haseorim. For many areas in Jewish law, spelt is considered to be a subcategory of wheat, and oats and rye are considered to be a subcategory of barley. It's not going to have any practical meaning today, but in other parts of halacha, later on in the Rambam, we're going to see for kilayim, for example, for mixing different species, these are not considered to be mixing, because they're considered to be one type. These 5 types of grain, kishahen shibalim, when they are like this, stalks, nikraim tvua, b'chol makom. That's when they're called in halachic terminology tvua. When you see the word tvua, it refers to grain in its stalk form. Then if you take them and you thresh them and you winnow them, that's when you separate the kernels from the chaff, from the motz. Nikraim dagan. Then they change names. Now they're called dagan. Grain is specifically a reference to the kernels after they've been processed. Then when you grind them, he kind of skips a stage, because when you grind them, they're called kemach, they're called flour. But if you grind them, v'lashinet kimchan v'ofinotan, and you knead the flour, and you bake them, nikraim pat, then they're called bread. V'hapat ha'na'aseh me'echad mehen, bread that's made from one of these 5 grains, hi ha'nikrat pat b'chol makom below livui, is called in halacha bread with no extra name. If it's other grains, they'll call it rice bread, this bread. But if you just see plain bread, it means either wheat, barley, oats, spelt, or rye. A bread made from those doughs. Halacha bet, ha'ochel pat, if you eat bread, and by bread again we mean these 5 grains processed into bread, chayav levarech lefaneha, then you're obligated to make a blessing before, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz, thank you Hashem, who brings out bread from the ground. Ula'achareha arba brachot, and after it you have to make 4 blessings, the full Birkat HaMazon. Achal, but let's say, we're going to go through a couple of cases now. Achal dagan shaluk, kemo shehu. If you took grain and you cooked it as is means you took the whole kernel. You didn't even crush the kernel, you didn't peel it. It's called in modern English wheat berries. You literally, this is wheat. You took literally the kernels of wheat and you cooked them. Mevarech lefanav borei pri ha'adama ula'acharav borei nefashot rabot. So this you can't consider to be bread. So actually, you make borei pri ha'adama. It grows from the ground. It's not in a state of mizonot because it hasn't been made into a proper baked dish. So you make borei pri ha'adama. It's grain, straight up grain. Same would be for barley. If it's whole, if you haven't done anything to the actual kernels, you cook them as they are. The blessing before is borei pri ha'adama. The blessing afterwards is borei nefashot rabot, as you would make an after blessing for any food. Achal kemach, if you literally ate flour for whatever reason. Let's say you wanted to eat flour. Mevarech lefanav shehakol. Since this is not normal, typically people don't eat flour, so you actually don't even make ha'adama, you make on it shehakol. It's like it goes into the regular, like the general category of blessings. You make shehakol on it, ula'acharav borei nefashot rabot, and then afterwards borei nefashot. Now, let's say, halacha gimel, you take kemach, shel echad mechameshet haminin. You take the flour of one of the 5 types of grain, so it's already been processed. Sheshlakuhu ve'ervo b'mayim o bishar mashkim. And you cooked it, but you didn't cook it as a single unit. The way you cooked it was you mixed it with a liquid, with water or with other liquids. We call this today a porridge. Grits is going to be soon. A porridge is where you took the flour and you put it into water. There's nothing of the grain that you can see. It's just become a mixture.
Like a soup.
Huh? So it depends what the texture is. Im hayaveh, if it was a thick texture, so that you can eat it, even chew it in a way. This is considered to be a natural process of flour. You can't call it bread, obviously, but it's a natural dish that's baked out of flour, and therefore it requires borei minei mizonot. Ulevasof, and the after blessing will be like on anything mizonot, ala michyav, ala kalkala, as we'll see in the end of today's chapter. V'im hayarach, but if it was so thin, the batter was so soft, kadei sheyera oili shtiya, could even be in a way, it could even be drank, so it's like a beverage, and therefore mevarech alav vatchila shehakol ulevasof borei nefashot rabot, even though it's made out of the contents of it are flour and water, but it's drink-like. So you make shehakol and afterwards borei nefashot rabot. Now, here's another variation. Halakha Daled says, you took kemach, you took flour, shalechad mechameshet haminin, but now, instead of making the entire mixture mixed with water, shebishlo bikdeira, you cooked the flour in a pot. Obviously, it doesn't mean you took raw flour, because flour would just disperse. But let's say you mixed it with something, you made it into some kind of a ball, and you're cooking the flour in the pot. Bein levado, whether you're cooking it by itself, bein she'ervo and varim acherim, whether you mix it with other ingredients, you can go on levivot v'chayotzei behen. I know levivot today means latkes, but here it refers to like dumplings. Matzah balls, exactly. You took flour and some other things, you made it into a ball, and now you're cooking it in a pot. This is different to the other case where the actual flour and water mixed and became the dish. V'chein, and similarly, hadagan shechilko o katsho. You took grain, like the last case, but over there, in the last case, you didn't do anything to it. Here, you split the grains, or you crushed them, ubishlo bigdeira, and now you cook them in a pot. Gon harifot, begeres hakarmel v'chayotzei bahen. Different translations here, but something like groats or grits. This is oatmeal. Many people will say even oatmeal will look somewhat like this because you can see the grains, but it's been processed, it's been crushed, it's been split. V'chol zehu hanikra ma'aseh kedera. All of these three cases go into the category of ma'aseh kedera, cooked foods. V'chen kol tavshil, and the truth is any cooked dish she'erav bo mechameshet haminin, into which some of the 5 types of grain were mixed in, ben kemach, ben pat, whether in the flour state or in the bread state, but tchila mevarech ala borei minei mizonot, on all of these things you make in the beginning borei minei mizonot, because you've processed, let's say the case of the matzah balls. It's another natural dish. Make it out of flour and the mixed stuff and you cooked it in water. Or the groats and the grits or the oatmeal cereal, it's a natural result for these processed grains, and you make borei minei mizonot. And the same thing applies to any cooked dish, which as soon as you mix into it mizonot, it becomes the primary ingredient.
So if you have like a matzo ball soup, it would be mizonot, or you do both shehakol and mizonot?
So you do both. Yeah, but for the matzah ball, it would be mizonot. Halacha hey, b'med dvarim amurim. When do we say that any dish into which you mix mizonot becomes mizonot? K'shehaya hamin hazeh chashuv etzlo v'lo haya tefila. When this species of grain was important to you and it was not secondary in the mixture. But if the 5 types of grain that you mixed in was secondary to the mixture, it wasn't the main point of the mixture, and we'll soon see what defines that. It's not quantity like somebody might think. It's a little different. You only make a blessing on the main part of the dish, and with that you exempt the secondary part of the dish. It's a general rule in blessings. If you have a 2-part dish, a mainstay and a secondary part, you make a blessing on the main one and you exempt thereby the secondary dish. According to the Rambam, it doesn't matter whether the secondary part was mixed in or not. So not mixed in, let's say it would be cereal and milk. Cereal and milk is not mixed in, but whatever is main to you, if you don't like the milk is just there to soften the Cheerios, you make a blessing on the Cheerios and that's it. And of course, if it was literally mixed in, it became one conglomerate, one dish, then you go after the main thing. Now, for mizonot, typically, when it's 2 other types of blessings, we do go after quantitatively. Whatever's more in the dish could become the mainstay. But when it comes to mizonot, it depends on the purpose. Why did you put the flour into the dish? If it's for flavor, it becomes the main thing. I don't care how little of flour there is. If the purpose is to give more flavor, then it's mizonot. If it's only there as an adhesive to make the contents hold together, that's when it's called a tafel. As the Rambam says right now, what qualifies as a mixed-in secondary dish? Let's say you have turnip or cabbage, which you cooked, and you mixed in flour of one of the 5 types of grain, and the purpose was just to act as an adhesive, to hold it together. In this case, you do not make the blessing borei minei mezonot, even though there's flour present. Shehalefet hu ha'ikar v'kimchot tefillah, because in this case the turnip becomes the main thing, and the flour is the secondary. Shekol davar sheme'arvin oto ledabek, because anything which is mixed in simply to hold, as a glue, o kedei litein reach, or to give a smell, o kedei litzboa tatavshil, or to add color to the dish, harezu tefillah, that qualifies as secondary. But if you put the flour in to add taste, to add some flavor, harehu ikar, it becomes the mainstay, and the entire dish now becomes mizonot. Lefichach, says the Rambam. Therefore, minei dvash, you have types of honey, shemevashlinotan, they used to cook them. Venotnin bahen chelev chita, kedei ledabek, they used to put starch, wheat starch, in order to hold it together. Ve'osin mehen minei mitika, and you make different sweets out of it. So you look at the thing, you see starch, but the starch is only there to hold it together. It's not for taste. So therefore, you don't make on it a mizonot, because the honey becomes the mainstay, and the flour is only there to serve the purpose of sticking together. That is an example of a secondary dish which would be mixed in. It becomes one big cholent. What would be an example of a secondary food which is not mixed in? Let's say a person needed to eat salty fish, the achal hapat imo, and you're eating bread with it. So the salt, the brine, shouldn't damage your throat and your tongue. You're allowed to make a blessing only on the salty fish and thereby exempt the bread, because the bread becomes secondary to the fish. Anything similar to that goes into that category. Now, that's not so simple. In Shulchan Aruch, we rule that typically, if this is the case and it's bread separately, it's very hard to make the bread into a tafel. This case that the Rambam is talking about is somebody who needs, he uses the word sarich, he needs to eat salty fish because, as the Rambam explains elsewhere, this person used to eat a lot of fruit, and to offset the effect of the fruit, he used to eat salty fish with brine. So it was a healthful purpose. Then the bread becomes tafel. But if you're stam eating herring and crackers, and you don't want the salty herring to get to your mouth, and you're going to eat bread with it, you do have to wash on the bread. The other example that the Alter Rebbe gives, which is more common in his Shulchan Aruch, is if you're drinking l'chaim, and you want to take a chaser for a cracker. So then, it's very possible that the cracker will be tafel. You just make a blessing on the mashke. That's what you really want. Now, as soon as you want the cracker, even for itself for a little bit, you have to make a mizonot. But it could become into a tafel. Halacha chet. Okay, we have a very interesting halacha over here. Hapat shepatat ota pitim. You had bread. It was already baked into bread, and you slice it into thin pieces. Ubishla bikdeira olasha bamarak. And now you're cooking it into a pot. So it's cooking after the baking, or you're kneading it into a soup. Says the Rambam, and let's pay attention to what we have over here. I'm going to put it up over here because this halacha has caused a big problem. The Rambam says over here, Im yesh baptitin kazayit. If there is in these pieces the size of an olive, or he says, shenikar shehin pat v'lo nishtana tzurata, you can still tell that they're bread, and the form hasn't changed. Mevarech aleha batchila hamotzi. Then you make a hamotzi. That's the first case over here. The Rambam's pretty clear. As long as it's a kazayit, doesn't matter whether it's clear or not, it's always hamotzi. Or less than a kazayit, but it's clear that it's bread, it's hamotzi. Sounds like if you have, only if you have both problems, it's less than a kazayit and it's not clear, that's when it's mizonot. That's what it sounds like from the first part of the halacha. Then the Rambam continues, V'im ein bahen kazayit, but if there is not a kazayit, it's less than an olive size, or she'avrat surat hapat babishul, or the form of the bread changed, mevarech aleh batchila borei minei mizonot. Here it sounds like either one qualifies for mizonot. So long as it's less than a kazayit, it's always mizonot. And even if it's more than a kazayit, if it's not clear that it's bread, it's mizonot. So we have an open contradiction between the first part of the halacha and the second part. If you read the first line, it sounds like either way, either advantage is good to make it hamotzi. You have to have both lackings to have mizonot. Here it sounds like no, either disadvantage makes it mizonot. You have to have both advantages to make hamotzi. And in fact, the Kesef Mishnah writes, just because it's an incredible lashon, he says, "Lashon zeh huksha l'rov chachmei zmanenu." Most of the sages of our time had a big problem with this Rambam, and he records a time. He says, "Lashon zeh nish'al bepumbi rabati shel chachamim v'shel sofrim." There was a big gathering of sages and scribes who came to the Bet Midrash. Ubichlalam hanesher hagadol, among them the great eagle, Moreno Harav Rabbi Yitzchak Abarbanel. Abarbanel, who was a very famous Don Isaac Abarbanel, a very famous Talmid Chacham. Biyotol omed biyeshivat harav hagadol Mahari Abu Avzal, the Harav Maharari Fasi Zal. Mari Abu Av. When he was learning in the yeshiva of Mari Abu Av, they asked this question. V'harav Ma'ari Fasi Zal, he gid lifnehem yishuv zeh. There was a man whose name was Rabbi Yitzchak Fasi, not the Rif, that's Rabbi Yitzchak Al-Fasi, much later. Rabbi Yitzchak Fasi gave him the following answer, Vayikasher be'enehem mikol asher hugad sham. They had a big discussion in the Bet Midrash, and there was one answer that everybody liked. So here's the answer. Rabbi Yitzchak Fasi's solution. He says, there's three categories. If you look at the Rambam's language, it's very exact. In the first part, he says, Nishtana tzurata, and in the second part, he says, Avra tzurata. Form changed, form went away completely. So the Rambam is referring to two different cases. If it's a kazayit, so if it's clear that it's bread, it's for sure hamotzi. If there's a slight change, it's still hamotzi. Only if there's a total change, that's when it's mizonot. But if it's less than a kazayit, it's only hamotzi if it's actually clear, and it's mizonot whether it's a slight change or a total change. This way he resolves the contradiction. The Kesef Mishnah has another, this is the Bet Yosef, he has another solution. He says, both are true, but you see the Rambam gave two cases in the beginning. You cook it into a pot or you mix it into a soup. It depends if it's a soup or it's cooked. If it's a soup, that's when the first part of the halacha applies. A kazayit is always hamotzi. Less than a kazayit depends if it's clear or not. If it's cooked, typically when it's cooked it gets more mushy, so then less than a kazayit always mizonot. A kazayit depends if it's clear or not. That's how the Bet Yosef resolves it. But he leaves off and he says there's been plenty of commentaries, plenty of answers, and this halacha and Rambam is left very difficult to decipher exactly what he means. Halacha tet. Isa shenefet bakarka. You have a dough that's cooked into the ground. Apparently, Arabs who live in the deserts, they used to bake in the ground.
I think it's like a pita, like a flatbread.
Like a flatbread? They dig a hole. Rabbi Kapach, who was one of the big commentaries on the Rambam's Arabic elements, he said they used to dig a hole in the ground and they used to pour a dough, and they used to pour coals, hot coals into it till it would burn up. Then they would take out the coals and dump this dough into the area, and the coals would go on top of it till it would bake. And it became a very interesting type of thing. It doesn't look like bread, but this was like a dough that they used to eat. So if you do that, ho'il ve'en aleha tzurat pat, since it doesn't have the form of bread, mevarech aleha batchila borei minei mizonot. The blessing that you make is not hamotzi, it's mizonot. Ve'im kava mizono aleha, this becomes a very important halacha. If you decided to make your meal out of this bread, mevarech hamotzi, you have to make hamotzi. It's called kviyut su'udah. If you decide that I'm going to make my meal out of this baked good, even if technically, dryly, it's not hamotzi, you attach importance to it, and it's going to become your meal, you have to make hamotzi. Let's say you have a dough which was made not with water, with other liquids, with honey, with oil, with milk, or you mixed into it many fillings and spices, which is called in halacha pat haba'a bekisanin, a bread which comes with pockets, because it has a filling. That's how the Rambam explains pat haba'a bekisanin. Others explain it means like a cracker, thin dough, thin cracker. Afal pishu pat, even though it has a certain halachic element of bread, mevarech aleh borei minei mizonot. Technically, the bracha is borei minei mizonot because it isn't full-on bread. Ve'im kavah su'udato aleha, but if you decided to make your su'udah set on it, mevarech hamotzi, then you make hamotzi. This leads to the famous question of mizonot bread. Right? We find all the time around us. Itzik sometimes brings on Sundays. He says some bagels are hamotzi, some bagels are mizonot. Right? That's because of the ingredients that go into it. Or mizonot pizza, they make it out of apple juice instead of with water. So dry halacha would say, yeah, the mixture doesn't require a hamotzi blessing. But because of these laws of kviyut su'udah, the commentaries say, and it's brought in the Shulchan Aruch, if you're eating more than 230 grams, which is 4 beitzim, 4 egg-sized portions of this bread, including the toppings, you have to make a hamotzi. So if you're going to eat 2 slices of mizonot pizza, according to most authorities, there's no such thing as mizonot. You have to wash for it, because you have decided to attach importance to it. Same with mizonot bread. Yeah, if you're just having 2 slices, fine. But if you're going to make a sandwich out of it, or a bagel, technically, according to many authorities, it's not a thing. You got to have hamotzi. Yeah, if you go to New York, you'll see a lot of mizonot pizza. It's very kosher pizza places. Yeah.
So then, like, that would only help if you like a slice or two.
Exactly.
Like
Slice and a half, they write.
Wash,
Yeah. Once you hit 2 slices, you're already in the realm, and you have to wash. So it's very hard to get away with mizonot bread, mizonot pizza. But that's just for us to know that kviyut su'udah is an important thing. It makes it hamotzi. Okay. Halacha yud. Orez shebishlo o she'asa mimenu pat. You took rice, you cooked it, or you made bread. I'm translating orez as rice. That's the common translation, even though in halacha it's a little bit of a doubt. But rice. This is rice bread. But tchila mevarech alav borei minei mizonot. Rice is considered a grain for some areas, and therefore you would make a mizonot as enough to qualify as mizonot, but not hamotzi. Ulevasof borei nefashot. Interesting. After the after blessing is not alamichia, because it's not one of the 5 grains. You only make borei nefashot. Ubilvad shelo yehi me'urav im davar acher, provided that it's not mixed with anything else. Ela orez levado, it's only rice flour, and that's it. Aval pat dochan, but millet bread looks a bit like a cake, but it's a grain called millet, and you can make a nice bread out of it, more like a healthful bread. O pat shel sha'ar minei kitnit, or it's a bread from any other legume. Took a bean, you made a type of bean bread or whatever, all kinds of bread they have today. But tchila mevarech shehakol, that doesn't even go into the category. It's not called a grain at all. And you make shehakol, ulevasof borei nefashot rabot, and at the end you make borei nefashot rabot. Now because orez and dochan have come to be mistranslated in halacha, there's a doubt which one's rice, which one's millet. So the Shulchan Aruch brings down, and Alter Rebbe for sure brings down in his Shulchan Aruch, that a Baal Nefesh, somebody who cares about his soul, shouldn't eat rice outside of a meal, because it's a doubt which blessing it is, borei minei mizonot or shehakol. And nevertheless, if you do eat it out of a meal, you should make shehakol. That's the commonly accepted practice, to make shehakol. Some people make 3 blessings. They make mizonot, ha'adama, shehakol.
So the huh? was the seeds that they feed the birds.
Maybe in modern Hebrew. Orez and dochan, one means rice, one means millet. And halacha, we're not sure which one is which. So if we would know what's orez, then orez would be mizonot. And if we would know what's dochan, dochan would be shehakol. But because we don't know, it means it could be mizonot or shehakol.
Unprocessed and cooked,
Mm-hmm.
you make hadamah. And that's like the 5 grains that are like distinctly
right.
Grains. Why wouldn't that apply to rice?
That's true. Some people say it does. That's why some people make 3 blessings before they eat rice. They take a piece of mizonot, they make a mizonot. They take a piece of hadamah, they make hadamah. Take a piece of shehakol, they make shehakol. Different. Yeah. It's complicated. Halacha Yud Aleph. Kol shemevarchin alav batchila hamotzi. Anything who's before blessing is hamotzi, mevarchin la'acharav basof berkat hamazon kesidra arba brachot. You make a blessing afterwards, berkat hamazon, normally 4 blessings. B'chol shemevarchin alav batchila borei minei mizonot, but if the blessing before was borei minei mizonot, mevarchin basof la'acharav bracha achat me'en shalosh. At the end you make a blessing, it's 1 blessing, but it resembles, it's a summary of all 3 main blessings of berkat hamazon, chutz min ha'orez, except for the rice. As we said before, you make borei nefashot rabot. When do we say that you make the bracha achat me'in shalosh after eating mizonot? Sha'achal mikazayit ulemala. If you ate an olive-sized portion, about an ounce and more. Aval achal pachot mikazayit. But if you ate less than a kazayit, ben minapat ben mish'ar ochalin. Even bread, or certainly other foods, v'ashoteh pachot merevit. Or you drink less than a revit, about less than 3-4 ounces. Ben minayayin, ben mish'ar mashkin. Whether wine or other liquids, mevarech batchila bracha haru'uya le'otohamin. Before the eating, you have to make the proper blessing, because you make the proper blessing before, even before a kosher, even before anything. Ulevasof enom mevarech klal, but you make no after blessing at all. Halacha Yud Gimel v'zuhi bracha achat me'en shalosh. This is the text of the 1 times 3 blessing, the summary of 3. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam. Blessed are you, God, our Lord, King of the universe. Ala michya v'ala kalkala, for the enlivening food, for the sustaining food. V'al eretz chemda tova urechava sheratzita v'shehinchalta avotenu. And for the beautiful, great, and expansive land that you wanted and gave to our fathers. Right here you have both blessings. Michya and kalkala is hazanat hakol, the filling, and then the aretz is the next part of the blessing. Then we say, Rachem Hashem Elokeinu aleinu v'al Yisrael amecha v'al Yerushalayim irecha v'al Tzion shkan kavodecha. Have mercy upon us and the Jewish people and Yerushalayim and Tzion. That's the 3rd blessing, right? B'nei Yerushalayim. V'ha'aleinu l'tocha v'samchenu b'binyana. Bring us up to there and make us happy with the building. U'nevarechecha aleha b'kdusha v'tahara. And we're going to bless you there in holiness and purity. In some texts, they even add a line for the 4th blessing. Ki ata Hashem tov u'meitiv lakol. That's like the 4th blessing, tov u'meitiv. But the Rambam doesn't have it here. Baruch atah Hashem al ha'aretz v'al ha'michya. Blessed are you, God, for the land and for the food. Ubashabatot v'yamim tovim. On Shabbos and holidays, omer bibracha zu bichlala. You include into the blessing me'ein kedushat hayom, a mention of the holiness of the day. Kederach shemaskir b'birkat hamazon, as you do in benching. We say Tzevach Litzenu and Zachenu Tova B'yom Tov Hazeh. So we mention Shabbat and holidays.